happened last Halloween when some of my friends came over to stay at my house for the night. There were only 6 of us, 3 girls and 3 boys. We decided first to play some video games and then watch horror movies all night. For dinner, we all decided to have pizza. I can still remember I ordered 3 large pizzas and 6 drinks. As we were eating, we were all talking and laughing, joking around and having fun, and one of us had brought some CDs so we could listen to music. After about an hour went by, we noticed that the weather started getting windy and there were dark clouds forming in the sky, and then eventually started to hear some thunder in the distance. We looked outside through the windows and saw that people were starting to take their kids home. Before long, there was hardly anyone outside. It looked like Halloween was going to be a bust this year. As the storm started to get worse and the thunder became increasingly louder and louder, some of us were getting scared. One of my friends suggested we close all the windows and lock the doors. I guess in a way this would help us in feeling more secure with it being Halloween and the weather being so bad and all. In an effort to lighten the mood, I replied, "Oh, so you want to lock us all in the house and then kill us?" And we all started laughing. While we were laughing, one of us noticed a man through the window standing in front of the house. At this point it was dark out now, but we could see that he was wearing a long black trench coat with a mask on his face that looked like a skeleton. One of the girls said, "Now that's a scary Halloween costume," and my other friend said, "Yeah, because he also has a big knife in his hand." We all started wondering why he was just standing out there like that. One of my other friends stupidly opened the window and yelled out, "Hey, why are you standing out there like that in the pouring rain? Are you waiting to kidnap someone?" And then we all started laughing hysterically. After she said that, the man started walking to my neighbor's house across the street and knocked on her door. As he did this, we all watched intently out the window. My neighbor, Mrs. Brannington, answered the door, and just as she opened it, he grabbed her and pushed his way in and slammed the door behind him. We were all in shock and disbelief for a few seconds. I eventually ran over to the house phone to dial 911, but the line was dead. Now we were starting to really freak out because we thought he might have had something to do with the line being cut. Luckily, one of us had a cell phone and called the police and told them everything that just happened. At first, the cop thought that we were just joking because it was Halloween, but then the call got disconnected. Before we could call him back, we saw that the man had come out of my neighbor's house and walked back over and was just standing out in the street again in front of my house. Now he had blood on his clothes, so we can only imagine what he did to her. He saw us still looking out the window and started pointing his knife to every house on the street and stopped at my house. My heart was starting to race when I saw this, and I felt like I was going to throw up. We went around the house and double-checked that all the windows and doors were locked. At this point, it started to rain even harder. We thought that by now the man would have just left, but he was still just standing out there in front of my house and staring at us. We ended up calling the police back and reporting this issue again, and this time I think he realized that it wasn't a prank, so we took our address and said they'd send a cruiser right away. As we kept an eye on the man, after about 3 or 4 minutes of standing there, he started walking towards the house. He went to the side and started checking the windows to see if any of them were open. Luckily, we had locked them all earlier. Once he was in the backyard, we lost sight of him for a minute or so. It ends up that he was climbing the fire escape up to the 2nd floor. We tried to see where he was, but it was dark and the angle of the windows made it hard. After another minute or 2, we heard glass break. It was him. He broke in the window upstairs in the bedroom and came into the house, but we didn't know he was actually inside until we saw him at the top of the stairs. We all flipped out and started panicking. He ran down the stairs and cornered 2 of us while the others ran out the front door. As he slowly walked towards us, he had that long knife in his hand and was making this creepy "I got you now" laugh that was quite disturbing. As he started to raise his hand and all his attention was on the 2 of us, one of my friends quietly stepped back into the house near the front door and picked up a vase and threw it at the back of his head. He fell and was dazed for a couple of seconds, so we took that 2 or 3 second opportunity to run past him and out the front door. He got up and started coming after us and followed us to the door, and luckily the cops had just gotten there 20 seconds earlier because we ran screaming past them, and then he ran out and the 2 police officers arrested him. Once he was in custody, they put him in the back of the cruiser. They had taken his mask off, and I have no words to explain what this guy looked like. He was the creepiest, scariest looking guy I had ever seen. The only way that I can describe what he looked like is pure evil. My sister and I were always excited for Halloween to come each year until this incident happened. On Halloween night, our parents were going to dinner and they asked me to take my little sister out trick-or-treating since I was much older than her, so I agreed to take her. She was wearing a little witch's costume and she asked me if I would wear a costume too, but I just kind of played it off and said I'd wear a costume next year. She insisted at first, but then forgot about it after a few minutes. After our parents left for dinner, we left a little while afterwards. I locked the front door and kept the keys under the welcome mat. We started off by going to multiple houses and collected a lot of candy, and my sister was delighted. It was nice to see her so happy and smiling. As we were making our way down the street, I saw my neighbor that lived 2 houses down from us, so we stopped to say hi. After talking for a couple minutes, I looked and noticed my sister was gone. I quickly looked around and saw her over on the doorstep of an old house across the street. I rushed over to her and said, "Don't ever walk away from me again without saying anything," and she said, "Okay, sorry." After ringing the doorbell a couple of times, no one answered, so I told her it looks like no one is home and we should move on. She was being insistent on waiting. I asked her why it was so important and she said that there's an old lady who lives here and no one ever talks to her, so she just wanted to say Happy Halloween to her. As we waited a little longer, I looked at the house again and thought to myself that it looked pretty creepy. It was an old dark color with all old bricks that looks like it hasn't been upkept in 50 years. There were low, dimly lit lights that you could barely see through the old glass windows, and the curtains looked old, dusty, and dingy, but who was I to judge? After another couple of minutes, still no one answered. I was hoping this would satisfy my little sister and said maybe the old lady isn't home right now. Then she said, "Okay, let me try knocking. Maybe the doorbell doesn't work, and if I knock, then she'll hear it and come to the door this time." I thought to myself, what in the world is going on here, and I was starting to get a little annoyed with her. After she knocked, lo and behold, about a minute later, the door creaked open and we saw the old lady. She was really old, and I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but she was a little creepy looking and almost scary in a sense. To tell you the truth, she looked like a witch, and she didn't have a costume on, if you know what I mean. As soon as she opened the door, she said in a raspy voice, "I'm sorry, but I don't have any candy, but would you like to come in?" And before I could say no, my sister said, "Okay, thank you," and she walked into the house and started talking to her. I didn't want to be rude or anything, but there was no way I was letting this happen. I had no idea who this lady was. Once we were inside, the old lady closed the door. I was appalled at what the inside of her house looked like. It was like an old castle, and talk about it being Halloween. There were literally cobwebs and old books from like the 1700s, and all the things that you would see in a haunted house, along with creepy organ music playing in the background. I piped right up and said that we can't stay long, but she and my sister were already talking. I noticed this long staircase that went from the front door area all the way up to the second floor, and it was filled with dust, dirt, and cobwebs. She had long, scraggly, darkish hair and wore a long, old, dusty type of cape that went down to the floor. I was getting more and more creeped out by the minute and said, "Okay, it's time for us to go now. We need to go to the rest of the houses before it gets too late." Right then the old lady said, "Okay, but before you go, I have something for the child," and started walking up the stairs. I figured we'd wait a minute or so and then just leave, but she walked up to the top of the stairs and grabbed something and started walking right back down. When she got to about 3/4 of the way back down the staircase, she stopped and then all of a sudden started chanting something that sounded like a spell or an incantation of some kind. At first I thought it was for show or something, but then I saw that my sister was beginning to fall into some kind of a trance as she stood there, and the house was starting to rumble. All I could think of is, what the hell is going on? This can't be real. I grabbed her to pull her towards the door, and then the old lady screamed this horrid scream and then said, "Thou shalt not leave." And as I went to open the door, it was stuck and wouldn't open. So as I pulled harder and harder on it, I looked back and I could see her walking the rest of the way down the stairs. And I don't know why, but I looked down and could see that she had these big sharp claws for feet. I thought to myself, this cannot be happening. Right when she was in back of me, as I was pulling on the door, she was still chanting really loud. She went to touch my shoulder, and then all of a sudden everything just went black. When I woke up, I was laying in my bed in my room at home, and my sister was standing beside me and my parents were on the other side of my bed. They asked me how I felt, and I said, "What happened?" They said that before they left for dinner, I started getting dizzy and passed out, and as I fell, I hit my head. They said I've been out for about 20 minutes now. I couldn't believe it. It felt so real being in that old woman's house. Last year on Halloween, a group of my cousins decided to go on a trip to my uncle's house and asked me if I wanted to go. I wasn't really doing anything, so I said, sure, I'll go, and I went with them. Our uncle was going out of town and said that we could stay there for the weekend for Halloween. He has an insanely huge mansion, and it's really beautiful. Aside from the fact that at night it gets really dark and creepy there because it's out in the middle of the woods, it's still nice just the same. There were 7 of us that went, 4 boys and 3 girls, so we decided to take 2 cars for the trip. The fun thing about the mansion was, like I said, it was located in the woods, but there was a lake nearby that was fairly close, so we could go wherever we wanted to have some Halloween fun. It was good to have options for places to go. When we arrived, we parked the cars in front of the mansion and we went inside to check the place out. The girls went straight to the kitchen to prepare some food and drinks while the guys hung out in the big living room. We ate dinner while we talked about how good of a location our uncle's house was in and planned some different things to do for the weekend. After dinner, we were all sitting in the living room and one of my cousins asked, "What do you guys want to do now?" My other cousin popped up and said, "Since it's Halloween and it's dark and spooky out, let's go to the lake or out to the woods and go ghost hunting," and everyone made ghostly oohing and eyeing sounds, and we all laughed. Then one of my other cousins said, "How about we have a spooky party right here?" We asked him, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Wait 1 minute," and ran out to the car, and then when he came back in, he had some kind of a board in his hands. We asked him what it was, and he said it's a spirit board, and it's used to summon spirit. He showed it to us and said, "Since it's Halloween time, let's see if there are any real spirits here." We all kind of looked at each other and thought it was some kind of joke, but we all liked the idea and figured we'd play along. Little did we know what was yet to come. We all gathered around the spirit board and lit some candles and held hands. My cousin who brought the board knew what needed to be done to call the spirits, so we just followed his lead. We turned out the lights and he started to chant, and of course we played along, half laughing and half serious. After 3 or 4 minutes, the front door suddenly slammed shut with an awful force. We all jumped, but my cousin said it was nothing and that he had forgot to close it when he came back in from the car. He broke the circle and went to make sure it was closed tight and locked. After he locked it and came back, he started chanting again and calling for any spirits that were stuck in the middle that wanted to communicate with us. He said, "Show us a sign," along with some other words from a specific chant that he knew. Suddenly, a drawer flew open in the kitchen and all of the utensils went flying across the room. At this point, it wasn't funny anymore and we were all kind of freaked out. My cousin wanted to keep going, so he tried to convince us that it was just the cat, but we weren't stupid. We totally knew better, and we knew it wasn't the cat that threw the forks and knives across the kitchen. He said to hold on for a minute, and he got up and went to the kitchen, and then we heard a loud scream. We all rushed to the kitchen to see what happened. It was just him fooling around. He was laughing hysterically and was trying to scare us more than what we already were. As we all slowly walked back to the living room, we stopped dead in our tracks, all at the same time, and just stood there in shock. There was a ghostly figure of a huge man sitting in one of the big main chairs, and we could actually see through him. We looked at each other and thought, okay, this is getting pretty real now. We wanted to have some fun, and having doors slam and things being thrown around the house was one thing, but to see a ghost that we can actually see through, this was a whole nother new level that I don't think any of us wanted to experience. We were terrified, but we still mustered up enough courage to ask, "Who are you?" The figure didn't respond and just sat there with a stone-cold, deathly look on his face and had no expression whatsoever. One of my cousins, who I'll say is probably the bravest out of all of us, started to walk over to him, and when he went to put his hand on the man's shoulder, the figure disappeared into thin air. After that happened, we heard someone laughing very low and softly. It was so creepy and spine-chilling that we all freaked out and grabbed our stuff as fast as we possibly could and ran out of the house to the cars and left. While we were driving away, I looked back and saw that same man or ghost or whatever it was, and he was standing in the doorway looking at us, and the oddest thing about it was he had this really creepy-looking grin on his face, and all I could think was that he almost got us, whatever that meant. We left and never went back there. We told the whole story to our uncle the next day, and he said that he's never had any experience like this since he's lived there, and he's been there for over 30 years.